Karen blocked the contractor from building a ramp for my neighbor the day he came home, paralyzed from Afghanistan, smiled at his wheelchair and said, well, that's what apartments are for. When he begged her to let him inside, she bent down and said, maybe this neighborhood isn't suitable for your needs anymore. I just stared at her. That was 1 year ago. Last month, she was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. My neighbor, Mr. Smith, disappeared for 3 months and came back paralyzed from the waist down. I later found out he had served 3 months in Afghanistan. The contractor's truck was already there to install a ramp. Absolutely not, Karen said, popping up out of nowhere. This violates Section 3.2 of our architectural guidelines. All exterior modifications require 30 days notice and board approval. Maria, Liam's wife, was shaking. Karen, he literally cannot get into his house and he's paralyzed. Karen finally looked at Liam in his wheelchair. Hospital band still on. Well, that's what apartments are for. Maybe this neighborhood isn't suitable for your needs anymore. The contractor tried to reason with her. Ma'am, it's just a temporary wooden ramp. We can match whatever color. Are you licensed and bonded through our approved vendor list? Karen interrupted. When he said no, she smiled. Then you're trespassing. I'm calling the police. Liam wheeled forward. Karen, please. I just got home. I haven't seen my kids in 2 weeks. She actually bent down to his level, condescending as hell. You know, I find it interesting that you were walking just fine at the Memorial Day barbecue. Now suddenly you need special accommodations? My jaw dropped. She was actually accusing a paralyzed veteran of faking. I have his medical records right here, Maria said, pulling out paperwork. Karen waved her hand dismissively. Anyone can forge documents. I've seen plenty of R words pretend to be disabled for special treatment. That's when things got bad. Liam tried to wheel himself up the front steps. Fine, I'll do it myself. But wheelchairs aren't made for stairs. On the second step, he lost his grip and the chair started tipping. I lunged forward but couldn't catch him in time. He crashed backward onto the concrete driveway. The sound was horrible, metal and flesh hitting pavement. Liam cried out, clutching his back. Maria screamed and ran to him. And Karen? She pulled out her phone and started recording. Everyone see that? He moved his legs. I knew he was faking, but he hadn't moved his legs. It was just his body convulsing from the pain. Tom from next door came running. I'm calling 911. He already had his phone out. 911? Yes, we have a paralyzed veteran who fell from his wheelchair. Karen marched over and shouted loud enough for the dispatcher to hear. This is a false alarm. I'm Karen, HOA president of Willowbrook Estates. This man is faking his injuries for sympathy. He's an actor, not a veteran. Tom stared at her in disbelief. Are you insane? He turned back to his phone. No, please send an ambulance to 1547 Oak. Karen grabbed for his phone. I have legal authority over this property as HOA president. This is a non-emergency. Cancel the ambulance. Karen, call an ambulance. For his acting performance? I don't think so. She was still filming. Liam was turning pale, sweat pouring down his face. My medication, he gasped. It's inside. The nerve pain. Maria was sobbing. He needs his pain meds every 4 hours or the damaged nerves feel like they're on fire. Please, just let us get him inside. Karen lowered her phone. Nerve pain? How convenient. What's next? Emotional support peacocks? More neighbors were gathering now. Jenny, the nurse from 2 houses down, knelt beside Liam. His blood pressure is spiking. This is serious. Karen turned on her. Don't you have an expired vehicle registration? I'd hate to have to report that. That's when 10-year-old Timmy, who Liam used to play catch with before his accident, pushed through the crowd. Why won't you let Mr. Liam go home? He asked Karen. She pointed her clipboard at him. Because rules exist for a reason, young man. Timmy looked at Liam on the ground, then back at Karen. But he's hurt. He protected our country. Karen rolled her eyes. Allegedly. The crowd went silent. You could feel the shift in the air. Tom pulled out his phone. Jenny started live streaming on Facebook. This is Karen Henderson, HOA president of Willowbrook, preventing a paralyzed veteran from entering his home. Karen's face went white. You can't film me without permission. That's illegal. Within minutes, the video had 50 shares, then 80. The contractor, who'd been waiting quietly, revved his truck. You know what? I'm building this ramp. Sue me. Karen screamed about fines and lawsuits, but suddenly no one cared. Karen tries to body block the contractor's truck, screaming, I'll have you all arrested, and starts calling every board member, threatening to sue each neighbor personally for $10,000. But what she didn't know is that we were all ready to dethrone her, once and for all. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, watching the video count climb past 127,000 views. Comments poured in from veterans groups offering to help with lawyers and money. Around 2 a.m., my doorbell camera sent an alert to my phone. Someone was walking real slow past my house, stopping to take pictures of my front yard and driveway. They wore a dark hoodie so I couldn't see their face, but the way they moved made my skin crawl. 3 days later, Maria texted me while I was at work. Liam's surgery went okay, but now the insurance company was refusing to pay for the special wheelchair he needed. They said the fall was preventable and sent us a copy of the HOA incident report Karen had filed. Her signature was right there at the bottom, claiming Liam had been reckless and caused his own injuries. I drove straight to Jenny's house after work. She was sitting at her kitchen table with a stack of papers spread out in front of her. These were letters Karen had been sending to every doctor's office and clinic in our area for months. Dr. Patterson's office had given Jenny copies after she asked about them. 3 different letters just about Liam, calling him a drug seeker and saying he was faking his injuries for pain pills. Jenny had found 12 more letters about other neighbors. Tom's son Jake was home from ASU for the weekend, and Tom brought him over to show us something on his laptop. Jake had found Karen's secret Nextdoor account under the name Concerned Resident 2019. Over 200 posts in the last 2 years, all targeting specific people in our neighborhood. She'd posted that the Martinez family were illegal immigrants, that old Mr. Chen was a registered sex offender, that the young couple on Elm Street were dealing drugs from their garage. All lies. Jake had screenshots of everything. The next morning I met with Rachel Moore at a coffee shop downtown. She was a disability rights lawyer who'd seen our video online and wanted to help for free. She looked through all our evidence while sipping her coffee. She explained that viral videos were good for attention, but we needed to prove a pattern of discrimination to really nail Karen legally. We needed more evidence, more people willing to come forward. That afternoon, 3 neighbors from Willow Court showed up at my door with their phones out. They had doorbell camera footage from the last 6 months showing Karen measuring their grass with a ruler at 5 a.m., then filing violations saying their grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. One woman showed me her violation notices. Every single one came right after she'd put up a Biden sign during the election. Karen had measured her grass 8 times that month. 2 days later, Tom called me in a panic. Brian had just shown up at his door with 2 sheriff's deputies, claiming Tom was harassing his wife. The deputies looked uncomfortable as Tom showed them our evidence folder. One of them quietly told Tom he should probably get a lawyer before this went any further. Meanwhile, Liam's GoFundMe had exploded to $45,000 in just 3 days. People from all over the country were donating and sharing their own HOA horror stories. Then Karen filed a complaint with GoFundMe claiming the whole thing was fraud. They froze the funds immediately pending investigation. Maria was crying when she called to tell me. That money was supposed to pay for Liam's therapy and medical equipment. Then came the call that changed everything. It was midnight when my phone rang. Janet from the HOA board was whispering like she was scared someone would hear her. She'd been going through the HOA financial records and found something huge. Karen had stolen $30,000 from our reserve fund over the last 2 years. The money went to a landscaping company for improvements that never happened. The company was owned by Brian's brother. Janet said she had copies of everything but was scared to keep them at her house. I threw on clothes and drove to pick her up. We went to the 24-hour FedEx on Central Avenue, both of us checking our mirrors the whole way. While the copies printed, Janet told me more. Karen had dirt on half the board members. She knew about affairs, money problems, even immigration issues some members were dealing with. That's how she stayed in power so long. Everyone was too scared to vote against her. The copies took forever to print, and I kept glancing at the door, half expecting Karen to burst in. Janet handed me a flash drive too. Said she'd recorded some board meetings on her phone when Karen didn't know. We split the documents into 3 sets, one for each of us to keep safe, and one for Rachel Moore, the disability rights lawyer who'd reached out after seeing the video. Rachel filed an ADA complaint with the Department of Justice the next morning, while Jenny set up a schedule on our neighborhood app for people to help Maria with groceries and watching the kids while Liam was still in the hospital. 3 days later, I ran into Karen at Safeway, and she acted like nothing happened, chatting with the store manager about some charity bake sale while her cart blocked the entire wheelchair-accessible checkout lane. She saw me watching and smiled, that same fake smile from the HOA meetings. 2 weeks after the ramp incident, code enforcement showed up on our street with a whole list of violations. There's something oddly calculated about how Karen operates, measuring grass at 5 a.m. and timing her violations right after political signs go up. The way she bent down to Liam's wheelchair level feels rehearsed, like she's done this performance before with other people she wants to intimidate. Tom got cited for his basketball hoop being 6 inches too close to the sidewalk. Jenny's garden shed supposedly violated setback requirements, even though it had been there 15 years. My mailbox was apparently the wrong shade of black. The inspector actually apologized to Tom, said the complaint came from the county supervisor's office, and they had to follow up. Brian's signature was on the paperwork. The local news picked up the story when Jenny's video hit 500,000 views. Reporter Sandra Liu interviewed Liam from his hospital bed, and within 3 hours, Karen's lawyer sent a cease and desist to the station claiming defamation. The station aired it anyway. At the rescheduled HOA meeting, Karen's hand shook while she read from a prepared statement about outside agitators destroying our community values. She announced she'd hired a defamation attorney to sue 43 residents for sharing the video. People started recording her again, and her voice got higher, almost screechy. 3 weeks after everything started, my editor at the Tribune called me into his office. Karen's lawyer had sent a letter threatening to sue the paper if I wrote anything about Willowbrook, and our insurance company was pushing to put me on administrative leave. My editor looked sick about it, but said his hands were tied. Tom found out his homeowner's insurance was getting canceled after Karen filed reports with screenshots of his grandson's skateboard ramp in the driveway, calling it an attractive nuisance that endangered neighborhood children. The insurance company gave him 30 days to find new coverage. I saw Maria sitting in her car outside CVS for 20 minutes one afternoon. Later, Jenny told me Maria's credit cards had been declined, and she couldn't afford Liam's nerve pain medication. She finally called her mother for money, crying with humiliation in the pharmacy parking lot. Jenny got called before the state nursing board after someone filed a complaint saying she practiced medicine without authorization by checking Liam's vitals on the driveway. The complaint included screenshots from the live stream and claimed she'd violated professional boundaries. Meanwhile, Rachel kept digging into the HOA's finances and found something interesting about Brian's brother's landscaping company that supposedly did all our maintenance. The company didn't exist until 2 months after Karen became HOA president, registered in Delaware with no actual employees or equipment. Rachel started tracking payments to this shell company and found over $200,000 had been paid out since Karen took over. A month after the ramp incident, I decided to attend Brian's county commissioner meeting downtown. 3 people showed up wearing matching Support Our HOA t-shirts, and when public comment opened, they all stood together. The first one pulled out index cards and started reading about dangerous elements threatening property values in Willowbrook. The second one read the exact same script with different words, talking about outside agitators disrupting their peaceful community. The third one stumbled over her cards and actually said, "Insert specific example here," before catching herself and making up something about parking violations. I recorded the whole thing on my phone. 2 days later, Liam's new wheelchair finally arrived, but UPS wouldn't deliver it. The driver told Tom that their address had been flagged as hostile in the system, with a note about aggressive residents. Tom had to drive 30 miles to the distribution center in Mesa to pick it up himself, missing half a day of work. The manager there showed him the computer screen where someone had called in multiple complaints about the Smith residents being unsafe for delivery personnel. That same week, I woke up to Maria's screams from across the street. Their orange tabby cat was dead on their doorstep with its neck broken and a note taped to its collar that said, "Fake heroes don't deserve real pets." Their kids came running out and saw everything before Maria could stop them. The 8-year-old threw up on the lawn while the 6-year-old just stood there shaking. Maria collapsed on the steps sobbing while Liam wheeled himself out and just stared at the dead cat with this blank look on his face. The police came and took photos but said without cameras or witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. That night I couldn't sleep, so I started digging into Karen's background online. Found an old LinkedIn profile that mentioned she'd worked for 2 other HOAs before Willowbrook. Made some calls pretending to be checking references for a job application and hit pay dirt. A woman in Scottsdale told me Karen had been removed from their board after 18 months for harassment and financial irregularities, but they'd settled out of court with sealed records. Another guy in Tucson said she'd lasted 2 years there before multiple homeowners filed a joint lawsuit that also got sealed. Both mentioned something about missing funds and targeting specific residents until they moved. The next morning, Brian filed an ethics complaint with the state bar against Rachel, claiming she was soliciting clients and practicing law without proper registration in Arizona. Rachel showed me the complaint, which was full of legal-sounding nonsense about reciprocal admission and unauthorized practice. She laughed and said it would get thrown out, but she'd still have to respond formally, which would eat up time she could be using to help us. Then things got really bad. 6 weeks after the ramp incident, 2 FBI agents showed up at Tom's door at 5 in the morning. His son Jake, a computer science major at ASU, had been expelled the day before after an anonymous tip claimed he was involved in cyber terrorism. The tip included screenshots showing Jake had accessed public HOA records from the county website, which they'd twisted to look like hacking attempts. The agents questioned Tom for 3 hours while his son sat in the back of their car. They eventually let Jake go, but said the investigation was ongoing. Tom's wife was crying, and Jake just looked destroyed, kept saying his life was ruined, that no tech company would hire him with this on his record. I reached out to anyone I could find who'd lived in Willowbrook before Karen became president. Finally connected with James Morrison, who'd lost his house to foreclosure 3 years ago after Karen started fining him daily for grass height violations. He met me at a Starbucks in Tempe and told me Karen keeps detailed files on every resident in a storage unit off Baseline Road. He'd seen them during discovery for his lawsuit before he ran out of money for lawyers. Said she had photos, personal information, even notes about people's schedules and weaknesses. He showed me his file that his lawyer had gotten, hundreds of pages documenting every time he left his house, who visited him, even photos of his kids playing in the backyard. The next week, Liam started physical therapy at home and Karen parked across the street taking photos with a telephoto lens. She sat there for the entire 2-hour session, documenting how long the therapist's van blocked part of the sidewalk. The therapist noticed and closed the blinds, but you could still see the camera flash going off. Liam told me later the therapist almost quit right then, said she didn't need this kind of hassle. Then came the real shock when Jenny got arrested at the hospital where she worked. Karen had provided evidence to the police that Jenny had embezzled the missing HOA funds, complete with forged bank statements and doctored emails. The evidence looked professional, like someone had spent serious money making it believable. Jenny spent 18 hours in custody before her lawyer could prove she didn't even have access to those accounts. But the damage was done. The hospital suspended her pending investigation, and her name was all over the local news. I met Rachel at a diner way out in Gilbert where Karen wouldn't have people watching. Rachel had been doing her own research and discovered Karen had sued 12 different people over 5 years, always settling with strict NDAs. She pulled out a legal pad covered in notes and said Karen was building towards something bigger. 2 months after the ramp incident, my phone buzzed with a message from someone named Patricia Hoffman, who'd found me through the viral video comments. She said she'd been Karen's victim in Tucson 5 years ago and had boxes of evidence she couldn't use because of an NDA she'd signed after Karen destroyed her life. Patricia called me that night and spent 3 hours describing how Karen had planted drugs in her car, called CPS on her kids, and filed false police reports until Patricia lost custody and had to move states. The next morning, a FedEx truck pulled up with overnight packages from Tucson containing 3 USB drives that Patricia said would end Karen for good. I plugged in the first drive, and my hand started shaking as I heard Karen's voice on recording after recording, bragging to someone about planting evidence, forging HOA documents, and how she loved destroying what she called worthless people who didn't belong in nice neighborhoods. Rachel nearly dropped her coffee when I played the recordings at her office, and she immediately started drafting a RICO lawsuit, naming both Henderson's, the fake landscaping company they'd created, and 3 board members who'd been taking kickbacks. She filed it that afternoon with Patricia's evidence attached, and within hours the story exploded across social media when Liam posted a TikTok from his wheelchair. He calmly held up his Purple Heart and medical records while describing each of Karen's lies, and the video hit 1 million views in 12 hours. Veterans started arriving in Willowbrook from all over Arizona, parking their trucks with American flags and Semper Fi stickers outside Liam's house. Patricia shows up with USB drives like she's delivering the final boss battle evidence, and Karen's voice on those recordings probably sounds way too happy about ruining lives for someone who claims to care about property values. 3 days later, 30 veterans in wheelchairs rolled into the American Legion Hall and planned what they called Operation Rolling Thunder. They coordinated a peaceful protest where they'd legally block Karen's driveway by occupying the public sidewalk in shifts, and the next morning they executed it perfectly. Karen came out screaming and called 911, claiming terrorists were attacking her property, but the dispatcher recognized the address from all the previous false calls. The Phoenix newspaper picked up the story and ran my investigation on the front page 10 weeks after the original incident, with Karen's photo under the headline about the HOA president who terrorizes veterans. Their lawyers had reviewed Patricia's evidence and determined we were protected from any defamation claims since everything was documented. Brian got placed on administrative leave that same week when the county discovered he'd been using government computers to run background checks on over 200 Willowbrook families. His supervisor found files dating back 4 years with personal information, credit reports, and notes about which residents Karen wanted to target next. Karen started her stalking campaign against Maria the following week, showing up everywhere Maria went, but always staying exactly 101 feet away to avoid violating the restraining order. Maria would be at the grocery store and see Karen in the next aisle, at the gas station, and Karen would pull up to the pump across from her, at the kids' school pickup, and Karen would be parked just outside the school zone. Then the smoke alarm started going off at 3 in the morning for 5 nights straight, and the security company said someone with admin access was triggering them remotely, but wouldn't tell us who without a court order. Jenny organized a community potluck in Tom's backyard, where 40 neighbors showed up, and we started comparing stories about Karen's harassment over the years. We made a list, and realized she'd targeted 43 families in 4 years, always choosing people she thought were unworthy like minorities, disabled residents, and single parents. The meeting lasted until midnight, and we all agreed to file complaints with every agency we could think of. 3 months passed with Karen still sending violation notices daily, until one Tuesday morning when black SUVs rolled into our neighborhood at 6 a.m. FBI agents knocked on Karen's door while Brian was loading his car for work. They cuffed him right there in the driveway while Karen screamed that this was harassment. The agents found boxes of resident files in his trunk that he'd been selling to identity thieves for years. Karen stood on her lawn telling everyone Brian acted alone and she knew nothing about his side business. 2 days later, our HOA insurance company sent a letter saying they were dropping coverage because of the RICO lawsuit Rachel filed. The letter said Karen would be personally responsible for all legal costs going forward. I saw a second mortgage company van at their house that afternoon taking photos. Tom's son Jake had been cleared of the fake drug charges Karen filed and decided to do some digging of his own. He found records showing Karen rented 3 storage units across town under fake names. Jake and Tom went to check them out and found filing cabinets full of surveillance photos of residents going back 7 years. There were recordings of private conversations and detailed notes about everyone's schedules and habits. Meanwhile, Liam had started a YouTube channel called Wheels of Justice, where he posted daily videos about his recovery. He showed his physical therapy sessions and talked about how Karen kept harassing his family even after his injury. Within 2 weeks, he had 100,000 subscribers who started researching Karen's past in other states. They found she'd been run out of 3 other neighborhoods in Texas and Nevada for similar behavior. Then came the real shock when Karen's daughter Ashley called Rachel from her college dorm. Ashley said she wanted to testify about watching her mom destroy families for fun since she was 12. She had recordings of Karen laughing about making single moms cry and planning ways to force out minority families. Ashley sent Rachel 18 hours of audio she'd secretly recorded over the years. The Arizona Attorney General's office opened a criminal investigation after 7 former HOA presidents came forward with evidence. They all said Karen had taken over their boards through threats and false accusations before stealing money. One former president showed bank records proving Karen had embezzled $40,000 from his neighborhood. Things got worse when Karen started showing up at the elementary school pickup line every day. She told other parents that Maria was violent and unstable, and their kids weren't safe around the Smith children. Several parents complained to the principal, but Karen kept coming back with her clipboard taking notes. Rachel got a federal judge to issue an injunction stopping Karen from any HOA activities while the trials were pending, but Karen just switched to her personal email and kept sending violation notices to everyone. She even hired a process server to deliver them like legal documents. Then one morning, Maria called me crying because a building inspector had shown up saying their house was red tagged. He said someone reported structural damage that made the home unsafe to occupy. The inspector wouldn't say who called, but we all knew it was Karen trying to force them out. They had to pack up and move to a Marriott that same day while waiting for an engineer to inspect. Maria and I sat in their hotel room that night with her laptop making a spreadsheet of every single interaction with Karen. We documented 247 separate incidents over 4 months with videos and photos and witness statements for each one. The next morning, Tom texted me that 3 board members just quit at the same time. He forwarded their group resignation letter that exposed everything Karen had been doing to control them. She'd found out about board member Dave's bankruptcy filing and threatened to tell his employer. She'd gotten photos of board member Susan at a hotel with someone who wasn't her husband. She discovered board member Mike's son got arrested for weed possession and held it over his head. All 3 of them decided they were done being blackmailed and sent copies to every homeowner in Willowbrook. Karen showed up at my door 2 hours later with a thick envelope. She shoved legal papers at me saying she was suing me for $10 million. The lawsuit named me, the Tribune newspaper, Rachel, and 20 other neighbors as defendants in a conspiracy. She claimed we were working together to destroy her reputation with lies and fake videos. She'd even hired some big law firm from Scottsdale to file it in federal court. Rachel called me that afternoon laughing so hard she could barely talk. The FBI had just contacted her about finding Karen's secret bank account in the Cayman Islands. They'd traced $400,000 from HOA accounts at her last 3 positions going back 8 years. Federal agents were building a wire fraud case and RICO charges for running the HOAs like criminal enterprises. Meanwhile, Liam was making progress at physical therapy and starting to get some feeling back in his left foot. The doctor said he'd never walk again, but any sensation was a miracle after that IED explosion. Karen somehow found out which clinic he went to and started showing up with her phone recording everything. She'd stand outside the glass windows filming him doing exercises and posting videos claiming it proved he was faking. The physical therapist had to call security 3 times before they banned her from the property. 2 weeks later, we were having our monthly HOA meeting when this guy in a suit walked in looking for Karen. He was a process server with federal court documents about the racketeering charges the FBI had filed. Karen grabbed the papers from him and threw them back in his face, screaming that we'd all go to prison. She tried to rip them up, but he'd already legally served her and just walked out while she kept yelling. The security guard Tom had hired for the meetings had to physically block her from chasing the process server to his car. That same week, Brian filed for divorce from federal detention, where he was being held on his own corruption charges. His lawyer released the divorce papers to the media, which included a psychiatric evaluation from 3 years ago. Karen had been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, but refused to take medication or go to therapy. Brian's filing said she'd threatened to destroy his career if he ever left her or told anyone about the diagnosis. The storage unit company called the police after finding Karen had been living in one of their units illegally. She'd set up a cot and mini fridge and covered every wall with photos of neighbors and their cars. She had notebooks full of license plates and daily schedules for everyone in Willowbrook going back 2 years. There were recordings of phone calls she'd somehow gotten and printed emails between neighbors she'd hacked or stolen. The detective said it looked like something from a stalker movie with red string connecting different photos and dates. 3 days later, Karen showed up at Liam's physical therapy appointment and walked right up to his therapist. She told the therapist she was a mandatory reporter who had to report the insurance fraud she was witnessing. The therapist tried to explain that Liam's injuries were documented by military doctors, but Karen kept interrupting. Security had to drag her out while she screamed about filing complaints with the medical board. That night, Ashley came to Rachel's office with a USB drive full of recordings from her mom's phone. Something feels off about Ashley suddenly showing up with a USB drive full of recordings from Karen's phone. How exactly did she get access to her mom's private phone recordings? The timing seems awfully convenient with everything else falling apart for Karen right now. She'd been secretly recording Karen for months after realizing how crazy her mother had become. One recording had Karen planning to plant drugs in Tom's car, but complaining she couldn't get close enough. Tom had installed security cameras all around his property after Karen kept trespassing to take photos of supposed violations. Ashley was crying as she played the recording, saying she couldn't watch her mom destroy people anymore. The next morning, I woke up to sirens and saw smoke coming from Liam's house down the street. Karen had set fire to the wooden ramp the contractor finally managed to install the week before. She was standing in the street live streaming on Facebook while the ramp burned behind her. She kept ranting about protecting property values from parasites and welfare queens who fake disabilities for attention. The fire department showed up and put out the flames, but the ramp was completely destroyed. Liam had to watch from his window as Karen celebrated the destruction of his only way to get in and out independently. The cops showed up right as she was dancing in front of the burning wood, and they watched her live stream for about 10 seconds before moving in. 6 months had passed since that first day with the ramp, and Karen had gotten worse with each passing week. She saw the officers coming and started yelling into her phone about government agents trying to silence her. "The veterans are using mind control to make me look bad," she screamed while the cops put her in handcuffs. The whole arrest was still broadcasting live, and thousands of people were watching her meltdown in real time. The lead officer read her rights while she kept ranting about conspiracies and how everyone in the neighborhood was mentally ill except her. 2 days later, the IRS showed up at her door with their own warrant. Turns out she never reported any of that stolen HOA money as income on her taxes. Now she had federal tax evasion charges on top of the arson and embezzlement. Maria came over to my kitchen that afternoon and just broke down completely. She hadn't slept in days and kept having panic attacks every time she heard a car door slam. Jenny sat with her for hours and set her up with a trauma therapist who worked with harassment victims. The therapist specialized in people who'd been stalked and terrorized by neighbors. 3 weeks later, I went with Tom to visit Karen in county jail. Actually, it was Ashley visiting her mom, and we just happened to be there for moral support. Karen sat behind the glass in her orange jumpsuit telling Ashley that she was a political prisoner. "Everyone else is crazy, and they locked me up because I told the truth," she said through the phone. Ashley just stared at her mom like she was seeing a stranger. The bail hearing was the next week, and the prosecutor dropped a bomb on everyone. They found Karen's library computer history, where she'd searched things like how to cause accidental death and untraceable poisons. She'd been researching this stuff for months before the ramp incident. The judge took one look at that evidence and denied bail immediately. Karen screamed that it was all planted evidence, and the judge was part of the conspiracy. A month later, we held the HOA election, and Tom won unanimously since he was the only candidate. His first act was throwing out Karen's 200-page rulebook and replacing it with 10 simple pages. No more measuring grass with rulers or getting fined for the wrong color doormat. Karen's lawyer quit the case after she accused him of working with the veterans to frame her. She decided to represent herself in federal court, which everyone knew was going to be a disaster. That same week, Liam had a major setback when the stress triggered his nerve pain so bad he ended up in the hospital. Maria wouldn't leave his bedside and kept checking the door like Karen might somehow show up. The doctor said the stress was making his recovery 10 times harder. Rachel called me with news that 23 people from Karen's old HOAs had joined our lawsuit. These were people from the past 10 years who'd been harassed and fined and driven out of their homes. The combined damages were over $3 million now. Then Karen tried to escape during a medical transport by claiming she needed cancer treatment at a special hospital. The guards found her at the airport with $50,000 in cash and a fake ID she'd somehow gotten in jail. They added escape charges to everything else. 8 8 months after the whole thing started, we threw a huge BBQ fundraiser for Liam in the park. Every single house on our street showed up, even the families who usually kept to themselves. People brought homemade food and raffle items, and we had live music from Tom's son's band. The kids ran a lemonade stand and donated every penny. We raised $30,000 in one afternoon for Liam's medical bills and physical therapy. 2 weeks later, I went to Karen's preliminary hearing and almost didn't recognize her. Her hair had gone completely gray and she looked 20 years older. She stood up and started yelling that the jail had been poisoning her food with truth serum. She demanded the judge order blood tests to prove the government was experimenting on her. The judge just stared at her while she ranted about chemical warfare and mind control. After court, Rachel pulled me aside in the hallway. She said Karen's psych evaluation showed something scary. Karen genuinely believed she was the victim and everyone else was part of a conspiracy against her. She thought we'd all planned this from the beginning to steal her power. The next month, Brian took a plea deal. He admitted to using his county job to protect Karen's illegal activities and agreed to testify against her. In exchange, he'd only get 2 years instead of 10. Karen screamed at him from across the courtroom when she found out. The actual trial started 10 months after the ramp incident. Karen gave her own opening statement since she'd fired her third lawyer. She told the jury she'd uncovered a communist plot to destroy American neighborhoods. She said they were forcing undesirables into good communities to bring down property values. The prosecutor just let her keep talking while the jury took notes. On day 3, Patricia took the stand. She told everyone how Karen's harassment made her lose her house and try to kill herself. Karen jumped up and screamed, "Liar," over and over, until the judge ordered the bailiffs to gag her. She kept trying to yell through the cloth while Patricia cried on the stand. Then Ashley got up there and dropped the biggest bomb. She said she'd found a notebook in her mom's desk called the termination list. My name was at the top with detailed plans about how to make Liam's death look like complications from his paralysis. The prosecutor showed the notebook to the jury, and you could see their faces change. Karen had written about cutting his medication, blocking ambulances, and staging accidents. The courtroom went dead silent. Over the next 3 days, 47 neighbors testified about Karen's harassment. Each one described the fines, the threats, the attempts to force them out. Karen tried to cross-examine every single person with bizarre questions about their communist affiliations and whether they'd been recruited by foreign agents. The judge had to keep stopping her and reminding her to ask relevant questions. She accused Tom of being a Soviet spy because he drove a red truck. She said Jenny was part of a medical conspiracy because she was a nurse. By the end, even her own supporters from the HOA board looked exhausted. The jury went to deliberate and came back in just 3 hours. The foreman stood up and read guilty on all 37 federal charges: racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations, everything. Karen collapsed in her chair and had to be carried out by the bailiffs. 6 weeks later, we all went back for sentencing. Karen gave a 2-hour speech about being a patriot protecting America from invasion. She compared herself to Paul Revere and said history would vindicate her. She claimed the trial was rigged and the judge was being blackmailed. The judge let her finish, then sentenced her to 18 years in federal prison. The bailiffs cuffed Karen right there in the courtroom while she screamed about filing appeals all the way to the Supreme Court. Ashley, who'd been sitting in the back row the whole trial, stood up and mouthed, "I'm sorry" to Liam and Maria as her mom was dragged past. 3 weeks later, we had our first HOA meeting without Karen running things. Tom had taken over as interim president and the whole neighborhood showed up, even people who hadn't come to a meeting in years. When it was time for public comments, Liam wheeled himself up to the microphone at the front of the room. He sat there for a moment, looking at all of us, then said 5 words that made everyone lose it. "I just wanted to come home." The whole room jumped to their feet and clapped for 5 straight minutes while Liam sat there with tears running down his face. 2 months after that, the settlement checks started arriving. Between Karen's homeowner's insurance, the HOA's liability coverage, and a separate civil judgment against Brian personally, Liam and Maria got $1.8 million. It was enough to cover all his medical care for life, plus modifications to their house, plus a college fund for their kids. Tom organized a work party the next weekend to build Liam a proper concrete ramp. Every single neighbor showed up with tools or materials or food for the workers. Nobody said a word about permits or architectural guidelines. We just built the thing, painted it to match the house, and added railings on both sides. Jenny's husband, who worked construction, made sure it met all the ADA requirements and would last forever. About a year after everything went down, Maria texted me a photo that made me smile for the first time in months. Karen's search history reads like a supervillain's Pinterest board. How to cause accidental death really takes the cake for worst Google autocomplete choice ever. It showed Liam at a desk in their converted garage, talking on a video call with 3 other guys in wheelchairs. She explained he'd started an online support group for paralyzed veterans, helping them navigate the VA system and deal with the mental stuff that comes with losing your legs. He was turning all that pain into something useful. The next week, I walked by their house and saw the neighborhood kids had covered Liam's new ramp with chalk drawings. Big, colorful letters spelled out, "Mr. Liam is our hero," and "Thank you for your service," and "Best neighbor ever." Liam was sitting on his porch watching them add more drawings, and for once, he was actually smiling. A few weeks later, Ashley came back to town to deal with her parents' house. The bank had foreclosed after Karen went to prison, and Brian lost his county job. I saw her loading boxes into a U-Haul and went over to help. Pretty soon, half the neighborhood was there, helping her pack up and telling her none of this was her fault. She cried when old Mrs. Chen gave her a hug and told her she was always welcome back. I finally published my last article about the whole Willowbrook situation. Instead of focusing on Karen's crimes or the trial, I wrote about how our neighborhood came together when it mattered, how we all stood up for Liam, how we documented Karen's abuse, how we refused to let a bully destroy our community. The article got picked up by the Associated Press and ran in papers all over the country. By the next Memorial Day, exactly 1 year after the incident, everything had changed. The HOA used part of the recovered funds to build a wheelchair-accessible playground at the community park. Liam cut the ribbon from his chair while his son stood next to him holding the scissors. Maria took about 100 photos while Jenny organized games for all the kids. Tom grilled burgers and hot dogs for everyone, and Brian's old county supervisor showed up to personally apologize to Liam for not catching Brian's corruption sooner. Now, when I walk past Liam's house in the evenings, I usually see him in the driveway teaching his son how to throw a football from his wheelchair. The kid's getting pretty good at catching, running routes while Liam calls out plays and throws perfect spirals from his chair. Maria usually sits on the porch with Jenny, both of them drinking wine and laughing about something. The ramp Tom built has plants growing up the sides now, Maria's attempt at making it look decorative. Liam still has bad days when the nerve pain gets too much, or when he has nightmares about the IED, but he's home, he's alive, and Karen's in federal prison where she belongs. Our neighborhood isn't perfect, but we learned something important. When someone tries to hurt one of us, we all stand up together, and that's exactly what we did. Thanks for letting me wonder right alongside you. Here's hoping we share more questions together soon. Subscribe for more content like this.